An 81-year-old veteran was just trying to enjoy his lunch when a biker slapped him in front of a crowded diner. The sound echoed the sudden, sharp intake of breath from every person in the room. It was a moment of shocking disrespect, a public humiliation meant to break an old man's spirit. But that biker's arrogance would turn to sheer terror just 22 minutes later, because the veteran's son was on his way, and he wasn't coming alone. This is a story about a line that was crossed, and the earth-shaking response that followed. In the heart of America lies the town of Harmony Creek. It's the kind of place that time seems to have forgotten in the best way possible. A town where the mailman knows every dog by name, and high school football games are the biggest event of the season. At the center of this idyllic town sits the Harmony Creek Griddle, an unofficial town hall where deals are sealed with a handshake, and the day's gossip is served up alongside the daily special. The Griddle was a time capsule of chrome, red vinyl, and the comforting aroma of coffee and sizzling bacon. And in his regular booth, the one by the window, sat Arthur Pendleton. To a stranger, Arthur was just another old man. At 81, his face was a roadmap of a life fully lived. His hair was a fine, silvery white, and though he walked with the careful slowness of his age, his back was still remarkably straight, a silent testament to a discipline learned long ago. His clear blue eyes held a placid quality, but deep within them was a spark that hinted at a world of experiences far beyond Harmony Creek. Arthur was a man of routine. Every day, at 11:30 a.m., he'd walk the 4 blocks from his small house to the Griddle. He'd greet the waitress, Brenda, with a quiet, "Morning, Brenda," and she'd respond with a warm, "The usual, Arthur?" A few moments later, a mug of black coffee would appear before him. He'd spend the next hour nursing that coffee, watching the gentle flow of life outside the window. Today, Arthur was wearing simple trousers, a pressed shirt, and a light jacket. Pinned to his lapel were 2 small, unassuming medals. They weren't flashy, but to those who knew, they told a story of sacrifice, of jungles and monsoons, of a war in a distant land called Vietnam. On his head, he wore a simple, faded cap with the word veteran embroidered on the front. It wasn't a demand for recognition. For Arthur, it was a quiet acknowledgement of a chapter of his life that had defined him. He was a pillar of the community, the man who volunteered at the local library and tended to the garden at the town's war memorial. Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a resident of Harmony Creek. He was part of its soul. He represented a generation that understood duty, honor, and respect. As he sat in his booth, the sun warming his face, he was the picture of peace. But the peace of Harmony Creek and Arthur's quiet world was about to be shattered. The first sign of trouble was the sound. A low guttural rumble grew into a deafening roar, a sound so alien to Harmony Creek that people on the sidewalk stopped in their tracks. The gentle symphony of the diner was silenced by the roar of multiple motorcycle engines. 4 large bikes pulled up, taking up 3 parking spots with an air of entitled ownership. The diner door swung open with a crash. In stepped a man who seemed to be the physical embodiment of arrogance. He was large, with a barrel chest and arms covered in a tapestry of faded tattoos. His greasy leather vest was adorned with patches declaring his allegiance to a biker club. His small dark eyes darted around the room with a sneer, followed by 3 others, identical in their intimidating demeanor. They moved as a single disruptive unit, a wave of noise and aggression. The hum of conversation ceased. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Brenda, the waitress, froze behind the counter, her smile vanishing. It was as if a pack of wolves had just walked into a pen of sheep. The leader, the one they called Spike, surveyed the room, relishing the fear he was causing. He pointed to a large booth. "We'll take that one," he barked. They stomped over, their heavy boots scuffing the clean floor, and threw themselves into the booth. Brenda took a deep breath and approached. "Welcome to the Griddle," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Can I get you fellas something to drink?" Spike was busy carving a notch into the table with a pocket knife. "Bring us beers," he grunted. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't serve alcohol," Brenda replied politely. He finally looked at her with contempt. "Then bring us 4 coffees, and don't burn it." His friends snickered. Their conversation was a stream of profanity, forcing the entire diner to listen. A family with 2 young children quickly paid and scurried out, the parents shielding their kids' ears. The bikers were a black hole of negativity, sucking all the peace out of the room. Spike seemed to be scanning the room, looking for a target. His eyes settled on the old man by the window, sitting alone, with a faded veteran's cap on his head. Arthur Pendleton had seen men like Spike before, men whose insecurities were so vast they could only be filled with noise and intimidation. He watched the family hurry out, saw the distress on Brenda's face, and felt a quiet resolve settle over him. He could have just left, but the medals on his jacket and the cap on his head were reminders of a promise to stand for something. With a soft sigh, Arthur pushed himself up and walked toward the biker's table. Every eye in the diner followed him. A thick silence fell. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice quiet but clear, carrying a natural authority. "This is a family place. There are ladies present. I would appreciate it if you would mind your language." It was a simple, reasonable request. Spike stopped his carving and slowly looked up. A grin of disbelief and amusement spread across his face. "What did you say, old-timer?" he sneered, standing up and towering over Arthur. "I said," Arthur repeated calmly, his gaze steady, "that you should show some respect." Spike let out a bark of laughter. "Respect!" he roared. He jabbed a finger at Arthur's veteran cap. "You think this little hat earns you respect? You think you're some kind of hero because you fought in some war nobody even remembers?" The insult hung in the air, venomous and cruel. Arthur's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. "That little hat," Arthur said, his voice now laced with cold steel, "represents men who gave everything so that you could have the freedom to act like a fool in a public diner. You might want to remember that." The truth in Arthur's words seemed to enrage Spike. His face contorted in a mask of fury. "You old piece of trash," Spike spat. "You don't get to tell me anything." And then he did it. With a shockingly fast movement, he raised his hand and slapped Arthur across the face. It wasn't a punch, it was a slap. An open-palmed, deliberately demeaning strike meant to humiliate. The sharp crack echoed through the diner. A sonic boom of disrespect. A collective gasp went through the room. Brenda brought her hand to her mouth in horror. A red mark began to bloom on Arthur's weathered cheek. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't cry out. He absorbed the blow. A silent, stoic rock. He slowly raised a hand to straighten his cap, which had been knocked askew. He adjusted it, then lowered his hand and met Spike's furious gaze. In that moment of absolute silence, the power dynamic in the room began to shift. The biker had struck a blow, but the old man still held the high ground. The air in the griddle was thick with tension. Spike stood over Arthur, his face a triumphant sneer. He expected fear. What he got was far more unsettling. Arthur, with a bright red handprint on his cheek, simply looked at him. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger. There was something that looked almost like pity. Without breaking eye contact, he said 2 words. His voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet it carried like a thunderclap. "You're done." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Then, Arthur turned his back on the biker and walked slowly to his booth. He sat down and pulled out an old, sturdy flip phone. With surprising dexterity, he typed out a 2-word message. To Daniel. Message. Diner. Trouble. He pressed send, closed the phone with a decisive snap, and placed it on the table. Then he folded his hands, looked out the window, and waited. Spike's cronies cackled. "What's he gonna do? Call the old folks home for backup?" Spike swaggered back to his booth. "Let him call whoever he wants," he boasted. "There's nobody in this sad little town that's gonna do a damn thing." The next 22 minutes were the longest in the history of Harmony Creek. The diner was trapped in suspended animation. The only sounds were the bikers bragging and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each tick seemed to amplify the tension. Spike grew bored and decided to torment Arthur further. "Hey, Grandpa, your backup get a flat tire on their rascal scooter?" Arthur didn't respond. He just stared out the window, his expression serene. It was this serenity that began to unnerve Spike. It was unnatural. The old man should be scared. A tiny seed of doubt began to grow in the biker's mind. Tick, tock. The clock on the wall hit 11:52 a.m. 20 minutes had passed. Then, a new sound began. It was faint at first, a low, deep thrumming that was felt more than heard. It wasn't motorcycles. It was deeper, more powerful. A rhythmic, ground-shaking hum. The sound grew louder. The windows of the griddle began to vibrate. Spike's sneer faltered. Tick, tock. 11:54 a.m. 22 minutes had passed. And then, they appeared. The first vehicle to round the corner onto Main Street was a Humvee, painted in desert camouflage. It stopped directly in front of the griddle. Then another appeared, and another. Then came a larger troop transport truck. The street was now filling with a convoy of military vehicles, forming a silent, imposing blockade. Soldiers in full combat gear began to disembark, moving with a disciplined, silent purpose. Inside the diner, everyone was pressed against the glass, their faces a mixture of awe and growing terror. What was happening? The passenger door of the lead Humvee opened. Out stepped a man who commanded attention without saying a word. He wore the immaculate Class A uniform of the United States Army, his jacket adorned with a galaxy of ribbons and medals. On his shoulders were the shining silver stars of a high-ranking general. His face was set in an expression of cold, controlled fury. This was General Daniel Pendleton. He walked towards the entrance, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. In the biker's booth, Spike's face had gone a pasty, sickly white. The man he had mocked and slapped was being met with a response that defied all logic. The bell on the diner door jingled like a funeral toll. General Pendleton stepped inside. His sharp eyes took in the scene, the terrified patrons, the cowering bikers, and finally his father, sitting calmly by the window, a red mark still visible on his cheek. The general's gaze lingered on that mark, a flash of something truly dangerous crossing his face before being brought back under iron control. He strode across the diner, walking directly past the biker's booth as if they were insects. He stopped at his father's table and came to a position of attention. "Dad," he said, his voice a low baritone filled with concern. "You sent a message. Are you all right?" Arthur looked up at his son, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm fine, Daniel. Just a little misunderstanding." The general's eyes once again flickered to the red mark. "I see," he said, his voice dropping to a near-zero temperature. Only then did he turn and face the biker's booth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of the stars on his shoulder and the platoon of armed soldiers outside did the talking for him. He looked directly at Spike, his eyes like chips of ice. "Did you," the general began, his voice dangerously quiet, "put your hand on my father?" Spike was trembling. It was," he stammered. The general took one step closer. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you touch him?" Two military police officers had entered silently behind the general. Spike finally found his voice, a pathetic, squeaking whimper. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know who he was." General Pendleton's expression was one of pure contempt. "That's your mistake," the general said, his voice cutting like a razor. "You thought you had to know who he was to show him respect. You should have respected him simply for what he is. A man, an elder, and a veteran who fought for your right to be a disgrace. You failed on all counts." He gave a slight nod to the MPs. "Get them out of my sight," he commanded. The MPs moved in and pulled the terrified bikers from the booth. As they were cuffed and escorted out, Spike looked back at Arthur, his eyes pleading. Arthur simply gave a slow, sad shake of his head and turned back to the window. Justice, in its own overwhelming way, had been served. Section 6. A modern legend and its moral. As the MPs led the humbled bikers out, a strange thing happened. An elderly woman started to clap. Soon, the entire diner erupted in spontaneous applause. It wasn't for the show of force, but for the restoration of dignity. It was for Arthur. General Pendleton turned back to his father. "Let's get you home, Dad," he said gently. Brenda rushed over with a warm apple pie in a box. "This is on the house, Arthur, for you and for your son." As father and son walked out, the soldiers parted for them. The convoy started its engines and departed, leaving the residents of Harmony Creek in stunned, reverent silence. Now, the story of what happened that day has become something of a modern legend, told and retold across the country. And let's be honest, it probably is a legend. Skeptics will rightly point out that a U.S. general can't just deploy a military convoy for a civilian dispute. Doing so would likely violate the Posse Comitatus Act, a law that generally prohibits using the military for domestic law enforcement. But whether every detail is line for line accurate doesn't matter. The message at the heart of this story is what's powerfully true. It's a lesson that a person's worth isn't measured by the volume of their voice, but by the quiet dignity with which they carry themselves. Arthur's strength wasn't in fighting back. It was in his refusal to be dragged down to the biker's level. It's also a lesson about the hidden depths within every person we meet. The biker made the critical mistake of judging a book by its cover. He saw a frail old man and assumed weakness. He had no idea he was insulting a decorated war hero and, more importantly, the father of one of the most powerful men in the U.S. military. It's a stark reminder that we walk through a world of unknown stories. A little respect is always the safest bet. Ultimately, the story champions the unwavering power of loyalty and family. The text message, "Diner, trouble," was all it took. It speaks to a deep-seated human desire to know that, no matter what, someone has your back. The incident at the Harmony Creek Griddle became a local piece of folklore with a constant reminder: be good to one another, respect your elders, honor those who have served, because you never, ever know when a quiet old man in a veteran's cap might have the entire United States Army on speed dial. If this story of justice and respect resonates with you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next story. We want to hear from you in the comments below. What does the word respect truly mean to you? In a world full of noise and chaos, true strength is often found in the quiet dignity of a man like Arthur Pendleton, and in the unwavering loyalty of those who love him. The biker learned his lesson the hard way. For the rest of us, the story is a powerful reminder. Never, ever judge a book by its cover.